On behalf of the Educator Effectiveness Committee, I call this meeting to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Dr. Bofi. Present. Mr. Castillo.
Present.
Dr. Davis.
Present.
Ms. Ellis.
Present.
Mr. Garvey.
Here.
Ms. Holloway. Here. Mr. Mellering.
Here.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Ms. Orange Jones. Ms. Orange Jones is not present. Mr. Rock.
Present.
Ms. Boucher. Here. Ms. Tedesco. Here. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. First item.
Your first item is the consent agenda, adding items 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. The recommendation is to approve.
Can I get a motion? Mr. Rock? Ms. Holloway? Okay, next item.
Your next item is on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of initial certification preparation pathway proposal submitted by Teach St. Tammany. The recommendation is to approve.
Can I get a motion? Dorn? Mr. Mellor? Second? Any comments? Mr. Morris?
Yeah, Superintendent Brumley, we're all aware of the nationwide teacher shortage, and so Louisiana is not unique to that concern. We had some really good action come out of the legislature this last session to address that concern. And that followed a survey that your team developed last year to provide our legislators with some sense of how urgent that situation is. I want to see if we can get an update from you with regard to the current teacher shortage situation in Louisiana, what the outlook looks like, and if there's any consideration for conducting another survey to feed into the MFP request for 23. And that would include some additional detail with regard to specific areas of shortages. So appreciate your comments on that.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Yeah, I agree that we had a really strong legislative session. We're able to tackle the issue in a number of different ways, from pre-service educators, particularly with education pathways and the Go Teach program, to thinking about individuals and other careers, to the master's degree, to the teaching program, and some of the retiree rehire legislation that passed. So I think on all of those fronts, we have made some progress. We're also launching our Teacher Advisory Council very, very soon to hear from teachers in the field around what's most important to them, how can policy better support them. But all that we know at this point is the term, the calendar year information, which was 2,520 vacancies. So we would not know going into the upcoming year.
Your thoughts on a new survey to give us an update of what that situation looks like. Maybe come back to us in October, or for sure by the end of the year, where we have an update. We have a sense of what that looks like in our state, and then again, give them the feedback back to our legislators for the next session for other potential action.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. I see Mr. Chapin here with the HR group, and we can work with them and see if we can get a sense of current vacancies for the upcoming year.
Any other comments from the board? Do we have any objections to the motion? Okay. Hearing none, the motion passes. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 4, item 3.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel regarding Algebra 1 certification enforcement. The recommendation is to approve as notice of intent and emergency rule.
Can I get a motion? Ms. Boucher? Mr. Morris? Do we have any?
One comment, Mrs. Phelps. So just so everyone understands, this will simplify the process in many ways for people to certify to teach algebra in our high schools. And the reason it's under the emergency provision is because we wanted to make it effective immediately for this present semester.
Members, comments, questions? Do you have any comments? Okay. Do we have any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 6, item 3.2, consideration of revisions to bulletins in response to legislation from the 2022 regular legislative session regarding practice requirements for admittance into educator preparation programs and certification. The recommendation is to approve as notice of intent and emergency rule, Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel, and Bulletin 996, Louisiana State Standards for Educator Preparation Programs.
Madam Chairman, I move the motion, and I have another motion to make when we finish with this motion.
Did I get a second? Mr. Morris? Comments from the board? Ms. Bochet?
I just have a question, and I'm totally in agreement with doing this for the initial certification and entrance into the training programs. I'm looking at the temporary authority to teach, that's on page 13 in our handout, and I'd like an explanation of what this language actually means, where it says the applicant must possess passing scores on, and the new language, exams required in accordance with section 303. When I put that to 303, we've removed the core praxis from it, and I guess we're left with the content of it. So what exactly are we saying that an applicant would need to get a temporary authority to teach a TAT? I'm a little bit vague on this language.
So I'll ask Christy Ballou with our certification team to come forward. What I believe we've tried to do is align the TAT also so that they could renew their they could get a TAT and then renew the TAT without having to pass the initial test. But ultimately, they would have to pass the content and pedagogy if you want to be certified.
Well, what do they need for a TAT? Nothing, is what we're saying.
Christy Blue.
Or the GPA.
Christy Blue, Director of Certification for the TAT. Current requirements are an undergraduate degree with Current requirements for a TAT, we require an undergraduate degree and a certain GPA, and then of course they have to pass the praxis reading and writing exam, or what we have currently. If the praxis 1 is not going to be a part of that, they'll have to have an undergraduate degree with a certain GPA for issuance of a TAT.
So it would just now mean an undergraduate degree with the appropriate GPA. So on this first sentence where it says the applicant must possess passing scores on exam requirements in accordance with section 103, not upon initial issuance, they do not have to have these passing scores?
Correct.
Well, maybe we need to clean the language up a little bit, unless I am interpreting it incorrectly.
Let's take a look at the version that you have in your packet and make sure that it's the accurate version.
Okay, but the intent is an undergraduate degree and the appropriate GPA average.
Correct.
GPA.
Do the exam requirements speak to the praxis exam? Is that the exam that it speaks to?
So, yes, well, praxis 1 was the original portion that was referred to.
I'm talking about the praxis content exam. Is that the exam that's spoken to in 527, number 3?
Content will not be required for issuance of a TAT.
So what exam are they speaking to?
I'm taking a look to make sure that the pack, what you have in your packet is the latest set of revisions that we submitted.
Page 13. For the body, temporary authority to teach. If the intent is not to have the passage of anything at that point, I think we might need to modify unless I don't have the latest version.
like that was a portion that we overlooked and removed in that. Because no exam would be required. We went through several versions, several iterations of that where the ACT was going to be required instead. That's been removed also, so we do need to clean up our policy, that particular submission.
So if we pass this today with that removed, and since this is also a declaration of emergency, that means we could request that a tab be issued today or tomorrow when we actually ratify this.
If they have an undergraduate degree from an accredited university and if they have the appropriate GPA.
Ms. Ellis? This is a rather significant shift that has generated quite a bit of attention. I think it would be helpful if Ms. Ballou would talk us through these changes.
I agree. Specific to that,
To what we're approving here, so that,
in general, everything.
yeah, I mean, we have a pretty large audience, and I think a lot of people are really interested in this one. So if you could give us an overview, so people walk out with an understanding of what changes will be in place, it would be helpful. I don't want to have to answer questions later, I want to hear it straight from you.
And before she gets started, Dr. Coach, I would say that it is all in response to legislation that was, I think, unanimously passed legislature.
Then it was unanimous.
Yeah. So,
Well, without opposition anyway.
yes.
Sure. So there was, as Dr. Brumley mentioned, legislation that was passed. The main one that most folks hear about are the Praxis 1 requirements for entrance into a teacher preparation program and then for initial certification. That exam has been proven as a barrier for entrance into the program, and so when the legislature passed the law to remove it for entry, we had the recruitment and retention task force that supported this, so we went in and we amended policy to remove the Praxis 1 as a requirement for entrance into a teacher preparation program, and then again as a requirement for educator licensure. That's one of the biggest shifts that we see in these policies here. That has effects across many types of certificates. It has effects across the TAT, of course, because the TAT is a certificate that is used as a springboard of sorts to get an educator into a teacher preparation program. And then once they're in an alt-cert teacher preparation program, they would get on the PL, of course. So this affects the TAT, it's very important to teach, the practitioner license, there's some other changes as well besides Praxis. I'll get to what other licenses those affect. It affects the OS, and then of course the initial license when they complete their teacher preparation program. And of course transitioning from any of the OS or the world language certificate when they transition to a standard level 1 certificate. That's the Praxis piece. And it is just the Praxis core academic skills for educators, which is the reading, writing, and math, that the removal is about. They're still going to be required to have a Praxis content exam for entry into a teacher preparation program. So they still have to have a mastery of the content that they will be teaching in the classroom. They're still also required to take the Praxis pedagogy exams, the PLT. They will take that towards the end of their teacher preparation program. So it does not change any of that. Are there any questions about the Praxis piece?
Yes, one, what does OS stand for?
Out of state.
Out of state. And then, so that you said they have to pass the Praxis content to actually get into the preparation program?
Correct.
Okay, so before they were having to pass Praxis 1 and the content to get in?
Correct.
And now it's just the content?
Correct. They already have an exam to get into a college generally, an ACT or SAT, usually those are entrance requirements for entry into exam. So the Praxis 1 was considered a redundant exam.
Okay.
Duplicative, so to speak, no need to do that again. It tests the same types of skills.
I thought the Praxis content came later.
The Praxis content for a practitioner program, if you're doing alternate certification or post-bac, you're required to take your content before you enter into a teacher preparation program.
Okay, and that's for people who are doing the alternative certification,
Correct.
is they have to get the praxis content on the front end.
Correct.
Okay.
Traditional undergraduate, the praxis content is not required for entry into the program.
Okay, but they get it they need to get it to get the certification, ultimately get the certification.
Ultimately,
Okay,
yes.
got it. Thank you, ma'am. All right, keep going.
So there were some other pieces that also were affected by legislature. One was, we'll get to the things that all are affected initial licensure. The GPA requirement was also altered for entrance into a teacher preparation program. The GPA requirement for entry into a teacher preparation program is 2.2. Previously, there was some flexibility allowed in the law. That flexibility was removed, so it's just a standard 2.2 for entry into a teacher preparation program. There is the GPA requirement for completion of a program, that's 2.5. We're just updating policy to make sure that all of these pieces are in alignment with the legislation.
May I ask you a question on that?
Yes.
You said we had the flexibility prior to this in entrance into an alternate program. That flexibility is going to be removed then?
For entrance, that was removed from the law, and our legal counsel said we can't be any less restrictive than the law. So since it was removed from the law, we don't have the flexibility for entrance into a teacher preparation program.
Well, we have, in many cases around the state, accepted candidates into the alternate programs with less than that 2.2 or 2.5, depending upon whether or not you're getting credit. What about these people that have already been accepted into these programs?
We're working with our legal counsel to make sure what our next steps are for that. I imagine since there's another piece in law, and maybe our legal counsel can speak up here, but since there's another piece in law that mentions that changes to law won't necessarily affect students that are currently enrolled in a program if it's an unreasonable effect. I would imagine that that would be applicable here, but I will definitely defer to our legal counsel on that.
Well, I would ask that we really look into this for the future, because we made a concerted effort to put that provision in. For many people who, I know we had a candidate who had gone to Tulane University. It's a young person, got basically all C's, never failed anything, had less than that 2.5, which at that time was 2.2, but had achieved great things in life and wanted to come back as a teacher. And in order to raise that GPA to the appropriate measure, would have to take 39 credit hours of all A's to even enter into the program. And was an excellent candidate. So we went through this board, went through the process of including that flexibility for entrance into the training programs, and now we're saying we're removing that flexibility.
It was removed from the law. The law allowed us to have that flexibility, and it was removed from the law. I'll defer to our legal counsel here on that.
And if that is the case, Superintendent, I would like that, if possible, if that is indeed the case, that we would get with our legislators to put that back in and give us that flexibility.
Yeah, we would be happy
Any
to,
other way?
yeah, we'd be happy to work with them beyond this point on if there's any technical cleanup that need to happen, of course, moving forward in the next step.
There are also some other options if they have a master's degree, which I'll get into the TP for that they may be able to obtain certification and at least teach in a class.
Thank you.
Can you clarify Praxis Core versus Praxis 1? Is that the same thing? Okay, just making sure.
So some of the other items that legislature addressed included reciprocity for out-of-state certificates. One of those pieces, current policy or previous policy and law required an educator to meet our preparation requirements. They have to have completed a teacher preparation program that included student teaching or internship before they can be issued a 3-year out-of-state certificate. if an educator, and while they are working on the exams that are adopted by Louisiana. However, law previously provided an option, an exclusion option for educators that had successful service in another state prior to coming to Louisiana. They had at least 3 years of successful years of teaching out of state, and then once they got here on their out-of-state certificate and taught for 1 year and were found effective, they could be excluded from taking our Louisiana exams and move on to the higher level, professional level certificate. The changes to the law this particular session removed that additional requirement of the 1 year in-state for successful. To make it a little bit easier for our maybe military families to transition, those types of things. So what's happening in this policy is an out-of-state candidate, if they were prepared in another state, they would be issued a 3-year provisional certificate for us still while they take those exams. However, educators that have 3 years of successful experience in another state prior to coming to Louisiana can be issued the standard level certificate once we are provided evidence that they were successful. They don't have to teach here on a year for 1 year and be found successful before moving on to advance their certificate. So it removed that additional barrier in the law, so we're aligning our policy with that. Then the last item was the temporary employment permit. That particular piece was a piece in law that's broadening our teacher candidate pool. It will allow an educator who has a master's degree in the subject area that's being taught in the classroom to apply for what's called a temporary employment permit. It will allow that educator to teach in that area and be found successful. Of course, there have to be attestations to make sure that no other qualified applicant was found. It has to be applied for by the school system. They have to attest that they searched for a qualified candidate and they can't find another candidate. This educator will be allowed to teach on a temporary employment permit for up to 5 years. It will have to be renewed annually. With the same attestation from the school system. They have to be found effective, proficient, or highly effective to continue the renewal. At the end of that 5-year period, if the school system is willing to still continue employment with that particular educator and employ them the next year, then they can advance to the standard level teaching certificate from this temporary employment permit. Now, depending on and there are 2 options actually. That one is just for the master's degree option. There's a second option that allows candidates who have completed a teacher preparation program, but maybe have not passed 1 or more of their exams required within 10%. It allows them the opportunity to teach on a temporary employment permit in the same manner. Now, we do have some safeguards in place to make sure that we are guiding these teachers, protecting our children, make sure our children are still getting a high-quality education. These educators will have to be mentored. If they've never completed a teacher preparation program before, they'll have to take some basically new teacher or classroom readiness type of training that will be providing guidance around before they even step into the classroom. But once they've been found effective for 5 years, they can move on to a standard professional level teaching certificate.
So how many times can a TAT be renewed?
A TAT is a little bit different from the TEP. A TAT is a temporary authority to teach. That is a certificate that is used when the person has a bachelor's degree.
Right.
It can be renewed up to 3 years.
So when you get it, you get it for 1 year.
1 year at a time. It's renewed with effectiveness and Previously, it was renewed with attempts at the exams required for entry into the program, which would have included the remaining Praxis 1 and the Praxis content. And now it's just going to require the remaining attempts at the Praxis content for entry into the program.
So I see successful teaching used in the bulletin updates, and I hear you talking about effective, proficient, or better. That would be ratings on our teacher evaluation system. But then you also reference successful service out of state. How do we know what successful service looks like out of state?
So we've worked with our legal team to get an attestation. Different states will have varying definitions of what that means to them. And so we've worked with our legal team to create an attestation they're providing information like the year, the position, what their rating scale is, and then how they scored, and what their equivalent of effective or ineffective would be. Once we have that attestation in place, then that's what we consider effective or successful.
So are you cataloging this for all this, are you cataloging this for all the states, and then as candidates come in, you'll go back to this reference, or will you?
They provide it to us individually for each
The
candidate.
candidates.
Correct.
Okay,
The candidates do. They must reach out to either their out-of-state employing entity or their out-of-state credentialing agency. Either can complete that particular form to attest to the fact that they were found successful, whatever successful means in that state.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board?
I have a question.
Yes.
In regard to Praxis content tests, Praxis 2, as we refer to them, has there been any adjustment of those scores or what is required in those areas to enter into the practitioner program or to achieve certification? And I heard you mention the temporary employment permit, but maybe you could go into that a little bit more, or if there's any other general adjustments.
Sure. In general, Louisiana adopts the recommended PASS scores that are recommended by ETS. ETS conducts multi-state standard setting studies for all of their exams. Those are studies that are completed with participants from multiple states. They look at the questions, they look at the content, they look at what the skills are needed to be proficient or to be able to be a teacher in that area, and they recommend a cut score. Louisiana has generally adopted those recommended cut scores for the Praxis 2 content exams. And so it would be the same for entry into a program or for certification. We're not going to make our candidates take the test again to get a higher score. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so we haven't changed that. We've gone with what they've recommended, and that has remained consistent.
Correct. There was a change in 2019 of the social studies content exam. For whatever reason, I was not here at the time. That social studies exam score was about 7 points higher than the recommended cut score. And we did bring policy to the board back then to reduce that score to the recommended cut score. But that's the only change that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And in regard to the temporary employment permit, it applies to candidates who have masters, but also you said to a candidate who might be about 10% under. So a person applying for certification who hadn't yet met that cut score could have a grace period of some?
Yes.
Is it a 1 year only, or?
So it's going to follow the same way. The temporary employment permit is going to work the same way for either the candidates that have completed the program but did not receive the appropriate cut scores, or for candidates that have a master's degree in an area in which they're hoping to teach. It'll be renewable every year for up to 5 years. Of course, the school system is still attesting to the fact that they can't find that qualified candidate. The educators will have to be mentored by a certified mentor. And the only difference between the two will be whether or not they have to complete that pre-service training. If an educator has a master's degree and they've not completed a teacher preparation program, we don't want them in the classroom unless they have some sort of pre-service training. So that's a requirement for those candidates, but it wouldn't be required for those that are just missing the exams.
Thank you.
Any other comments? We do have comment cards. Okay, we'll start with, call a couple up. Dr. Susanna Craig, Louisiana Board of Regents, and Kristen Gradney, Our Lady of the Lake Hope.
Madam Chairman, that last speaker could speak to the motion that I was going to make. Maybe we can hold her until after I make the motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Bruce Chapin, go ahead and make your way up. And Dr. Paula Calderon, make your way up as well.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak on behalf of this motion. The Board of Regents, we're in full support of both removing Praxis 1 from not only initial application into initial certification programs, but certification as a whole. We believe that the Praxis 2 is the test that actually determines really the content knowledge that a teacher needs to teach. And we also want to thank President Garvey for issuing the emergency waivers during the summer so that we could not only get new students into our programs, but in our alt-cert programs, which I'm sure Bruce is going to talk about, actually get some teachers of record in the classrooms who are also in alt-cert programs. So I just wanted to be very brief and thank you for considering this, and we are glad to be in support of this item.
Hi, Madam Chair, Superintendent Romney, members of the board. I'm Bruce Chapin, I'm currently President-elect of the Louisiana Association of School Personnel Administrators. First, let me thank this body and Superintendent Romney for the open-mindedness to the changes that have come across in the last couple of years due to this teacher shortage. It's something that we never saw coming, but it is something that needed to be addressed. We were, one of the areas that we were extremely short was certified math teachers. Well, LDOE did listen to our association. We had a lot of conversations. They did add a geometry add-on test this year, which was a great move. We've also changed the math praxis was changed to a new version of that test, and we saw the math passage rate in our district. I don't know about statewide, but in our district we have seen a large number of people that were struggling with that initial test that are starting to pass that test, and so we're getting more certified individuals in the classroom. Our organization was given a seat on the teacher recruitment, recovery, and retention task force. I've had the pleasure of sitting in that seat and are so thankful to the response of our lawmakers and this legislative body to the changes. In our discussions over the past year, we talked about many different ways to address teacher shortage. And I would encourage this body to remain open-minded as the recovery task force is not done. There are many other changes that are going to be coming because this teacher staff shortage is not going away anytime soon. House Bill 546 addressed a hurdle for many in our state, and that was core praxis. We have a large number in our district that teach our ELL population, and that entry praxis was a major hurdle for them. We have some rock star parents in our district that we actually hired to be teachers in the classroom. I could tell you success story after success story of those individuals, but they were struggling. We had one para that had taken Praxis 1 10 times. She is actually excited now that she can begin the process of becoming an educator and be paid as a full-time certified teacher when she works through that program. One of the problems is Praxis 1 was required for entry into those programs. Once they get into those programs, there is assistance to help them in preparing for the core tests that are required. And so this is going to be an advantage to them. Some have stated that making all of these changes is lowering the standards. Our association respectfully disagree with that statement. There have been changes to certification over the past few years. You just heard Ms. Ballou reference some of those that have, quote, what others have said is lowered the standard. But what it is actually doing is allowing us to get individuals in the classroom that want to teach our children, that follow our standards in Livingston as far as our teacher preparation, that we have. We've got some individuals in our district that do an outstanding job in preparing our teachers. And those are success stories. They may only have a degree. They may have just struggled getting that passage rate. But we thank you guys for allowing them to do that.
Our time is up. If you are up.
Our association would absolutely support each of the measures that are before you and the ones that are coming in the future. And lastly, I want to thank our university partners. We could not do what we do at the district level if it weren't for our university partners. So we want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
I did have a question. You mentioned other forthcoming actions. Can you briefly
Well, the task force
speak to that?
The task force, we talk at great length when we meet with the task force on different things that are coming. I would be probably a little remiss right now if I talked about those things because they have not been actually pushed forward from the task force, but there are other things coming that will require legislative action as well as this body. Thank you.
Make sure you introduce yourself, who you represent as well.
Good morning. I'm Paula Calderon. I'm Dean of the College of Education at Southeastern Louisiana University, immediate past president of the Louisiana Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. It's not working? All right. And it was green. All right, is that better? I'm Paula Calderon. I'm Dean of the College of Education at Southeastern Louisiana University, past president of Louisiana Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, representing the 20 university-based teacher preparation programs, many of whom are right there behind me. And I'm also a member of the Teacher Recruitment, Recovery, and Retention Task Force. And I just wanted to say that on behalf of the universities, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Garvey, for your emergency rule. We have to hire people to cover classes. And we were able to do that because of the emergency rule. We were able to open new sections, advise students into new sections. You don't just automatically fill up a lecture hall with no students. And so we were able to add faculty and hire instructors to teach those entry-level classes because of the emergency rule. We are in support of removing Praxis Core. I can say that Southeastern has raised their English 102 grade from a C to a B in an effort to make sure that we maintain quality. The universities are nationally accredited and they have checkpoints all through the programs in place to assure that we are developing and preparing the best teachers. And if somebody does not have the professional disposition to be a teacher, we counsel them into another profession because we only want the best for our children. And so thank you from the bottom of our hearts and just wanted to give a word of support from the 20 universities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Kathleen Cannon, Michael Falk, and Dr. Janet Pope. Please introduce yourselves, who you represent.
I'm Kathleen Canino. I'm just a parent, but I also advocate for children with disabilities. I have a son who has Fragile X, and he's 9 years old. I wasn't planning on speaking on this today, but the temporary authorization to teach and now the new proposed temporary authorization for the 1 year. I have concerns because in St. Tammany, a lot of the time, those teachers are put in the special education classroom. And those children are the highest needs. And so then we have these teachers that may not have the most experience or they have no experience with children with disabilities. And they aren't provided the training they need, and it just doesn't go well. They are frustrated, they don't have the support they need, and then the children suffer. And so I just have that concern, and I don't know if something can be done to address that aspect of it. But I know there was over 100 teachers that were out of field in respite classes, and I get called a lot to help parents.
so much so that I cannot keep up. And I just have concern with additional teachers that don't have training for interacting with our children with disabilities. So that was just my concern. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Falk with the Superintendent's Association, and I also serve on the task force. One of the things that stood out when we reviewed information for the number of students getting into the College of Education, and we looked at long-term, the numbers continued to drop. And then as we discussed ways, we worked with the deans from the colleges of education and determined that this is one of the ways we could help bring in more into the College of Education, not guaranteeing that they would graduate, but getting them in there. So we support these changes in the bulletin, and we do thank Representative Nancy for his efforts to get the legislation through. Thank you.
Good morning, I'll be short and brief. Janet Pope, Executive Director of the Louisiana School Board Association. Again, we'd like to tout Commissioner Tim Hunter-Reid and the others who are on the retention and recruitment task force for our teachers. Also, too, we'd like to thank Representative Mincy and Senator Peacock for bringing this legislation because this has shown to put a burden on people who want to be teachers, and this is just one way that we can take the gate down for them to see if this is something that they really want to do. So thank you so much for your support.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? I think Mr. Martin.
Yes, our DESE Executive Director would like to comment on this issue regarding the TAT and why it was not in the waiver, I believe.
Yes. I just think you all need a little clarification that the TAT and the TEP are not standard certificates, which is what the law addressed. And that's why it wasn't included in the waiver. The TAT and the TEP are called non-standard, and that is something that Bessie created in an effort to get more teachers in the classroom. Because the Praxis 2 is not required for the TAP and the TEP, I just want you to be aware that there's going to be no, and it was stated, that there's no other requirement for those two certifications other than the GPA and the degree. So I'm just wondering if it's even necessary anymore. But that is why it wasn't included in the waiver request, because it is not a standard certificate, and it's just a separate certification that Betsy created to allow more people into the classrooms that require Praxis 1 to get that certificate, if that makes sense.
Is there a substitute motion on the floor?
No, it's a motion to come after this motion is dispensed with, the current motion is dispensed with.
Okay, so, then we need to wait on this.
Yeah, hold her card.
Okay. Okay, there's no other comments. Do we make a motion? I mean, are we voting on this? Okay, so, let's roll. Anybody opposed? Any objections? No, none. Okay, motion passes. Now,
As amended, Ashley, because we have to remove that statement.
oh, the statement about the exam. Okay, as amended. Now,
Yes, Madam Chairman. Let me introduce the idea first. We just took some steps to try and address the teacher shortage. In a similar fashion, we have a shortage of school nurses, as has been brought to my attention. And I've talked to Kristen and the department staff, and they think that they can come up with some language, some changes to the policy that would help address the shortage. And I would like to direct the department to try to come up with that policy change or changes. So I'd like to make the motion that the board direct the Department of Education to bring suggested policy to the October 2022 meeting to address the current school nurse shortage.
Got a motion? Second? Mr. Mallory? All right, and so Ms. Gradney?
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? My name is Kristen Gradney. I'm the Senior Director at Our Lady of the Lake Children's Health, and we support healthcare centers and schools, pediatrics here in Baton Rouge, and we provide care for about 43,000 kids in the area. And we primarily hire school nurses, but over the course of the past 2 years, as with teacher shortage, we've had shortage in nurses, just nurses leaving the field or not desiring to go by the bedside. And because today the certificate for a school nurse requires 2 years experience in the field, we are having a hard time getting nurses in after that 2 years experience. So by removing the 2 years experience and allowing nurses who are fresh out of school but have had internships, pass their NCLEX exam, come into school nursing, that would really open up a larger pool of applicants who really have a desire to come in. But today, we can't allow them in without some type of experience, and once they've kind of entered into the field in other areas, it's really hard to get them into school nursing. So we feel like an internship program or some opportunity that would remove that 2 year experience would really help us to be able to staff better. Today, clinical needs of children in our schools are increasingly complicated and really can't be supplemented by non-clinical staff, which is what we're having to do today. So we really, really need those school nurses to be in, so we think that this would be a really wonderful solution to help our children who have those more significant needs function better in the classroom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any comments from the board? Any objection? All right, motion carries. Next item.
The next item is on page 23, item 5.1, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching credential, appropriate to the credentials of Mr. Robert Tucker Jr. The recommendation is to grant, deny, or defer. Is Mr. Tucker in the building this morning?
Madam Chairman, I believe our executive director is recommending that we defer on this item until tomorrow, because Mr. Tucker was not made aware of the time of this meeting.
Okay, all right, so can I get a motion to defer? I need a second.
Mr. Garvey, are you making the motion? Jerry, are you making the motion?
He's making it, not second.
Okay, all right.
All right, your next item is on page 34, item 5.2, consideration of executive session regarding discussion of the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of a person. Either one.
Oh, can I get a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second? Okay, sorry, I'm not looking now. Is there any public comment or more discussion on this matter before we take a roll call vote? In order for this motion to pass, 2/3 affirmative vote of members present is required. May I have a roll call vote?
Dr. Bovee?
Yes.
Mr. Castile?
Yes.
Dr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway? Mr. Mallory? Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Ms. Orange Jones? Mr. Rock? Ms. Boucher? Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I will advise the audience that we will be in executive session for the length of time necessary for the discussion. No votes will be taken while the committee is in executive session. All votes will be made in public. Additionally, public disclosure is not required of matters discussed in a properly held executive session. At this time, the Educator Effectiveness Committee meeting stands in recess to go into executive session.
To reconvene the Educator Effectiveness Committee meeting and continue with a regular order of agenda to vote on the items discussed in executive session. Make a motion, Ms. Bochet, Dr. Davis. Next item.
Next item is on page 35, item 5.3, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching credential appropriate to the credentials of Mr. Thomas Williams Gibson. The recommendation is to grant, deny, or defer.
Can I get a motion? Ms. Davis, Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis' motion is to grant the certification. Can I get a second? Mr. Rock? Any comments? Anyone in opposition? Motion carries.
That concludes your agenda.